and welcome. You're watching another weekend edition of News Now with me, Anjali Palod, and the biggest update that has come in from the United States this morning. A U.S. federal appeals court ruled that most of President Donald Trump's tariffs impacting numerous trading partners were illegal, but allowed them to remain in place for now. The 7-4 ruling by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit affirmed a lower court's decision, finding that Trump had exceeded his authority in tapping emergency economic powers to impose wide-ranging duties. U.S. President Donald Trump hit back, saying that the tariffs are still in effect, and wrote on his Truth Social account that, quote, if allowed to stand, this decision would literally destroy the United States of America. My colleague Sumita Karir is now joining in with more details on this update.
Absolutely, Anjali. You put that into perspective. Donald Trump has hit back that this is going to be devastating, disastrous for the United States and, of course, for the Treasury, given the fact that if it is upheld by the Supreme Court, then the U.S. might be required to reimburse, all of these tariff taxes that the country has collected over the past few weeks. So, President Trump has audaciously claimed virtually unlimited power to, in fact, bypass Congress and impose sweeping taxes on foreign products. That's essentially what we've seen. But a federal court, like you rightly stated, has thrown a roadblock in his path. The U.S. Appeals Court, it ruled that Donald Trump went too far. He bypassed legal procedures that are in place in declaring national emergency to justify his decision to impose sweeping import taxes on practically every country on the earth. In fact, the ruling largely has upheld a May ruling as well by a specialized federal trade court. In fact, this recent ruling that is coming, from a U.S. court, the 7-4 appeals decision has tossed out a part that the ruling will be immediately implementable. They have given the Donald Trump administration some time to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court as well. Remember, the court's decision centers on tariffs that Trump slapped in April, calling them Liberation Day tariffs on almost all U.S. trading partners. It has upended U.S. foreign policy and, of course, has kind of alienated US's allies, US's trading partners from the country. For instance, Japan, some of the deals have been done under pressure, especially when it comes to EU and Japan. India, meanwhile, has maintained firm red lines. There is some sort of a discord still going on with China. However, some relief has come in. So this is a big ruling that has come in. We'll have to see the ramifications and repercussions of this, and exactly to understand how this is going to unfold, we're now joined by Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta. He's a former ambassador and representative of India to the WTO. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Good morning. Thanks very much for joining us here on ET Now. First things first, what does this ruling exactly mean? If you could explain this in basic terms, and what is to follow after this ruling?
The first thing which has been enunciated by the court is that though the International Economic Emergency Powers Act of 1977 provides a set of actions to the president of the US, raising the tariffs is not one of them. So that is a very important ruling. The second point is that these actions can also be taken only in case of a national emergency. And President Trump's invocation against a very large number of products and countries does not constitute a national emergency. So on these two counts, but basically that the president does not have the powers to impose tariffs or taxes without congressional approval. That is the key finding or ruling of the court. So what the court has allowed, and President Trump has also used it to his advantage, is that they have allowed the tariffs to remain in place for the US administration to appeal to the Supreme Court. Now, if the Supreme Court, once the appeal is filed, and the Supreme Court could, it has two options. One is to rule that the tariffs will remain in place till the Supreme Court takes a final view on the matter. The other option is that the Supreme Court says that you take off the tariff increases, and you would be free to impose them once again if you get a favorable verdict in our from our court. So these are the two options. In all likelihood, the Supreme Court would perhaps allow the tariffs to remain in place till the appeal is finally disposed of by it.
Right, Ambassador. Very valid point, very fair points that you've essentially made, putting that entire story into context and what does this decision by the appeals court really means. But let me also take our viewers to what Donald Trump has responded on his Truth Social platform. He says that a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said that tariffs should be removed, and the USA will no longer tolerate enormous trade deficits and unfair tariffs and non-tariff barriers imposed by other countries. But I want to once again understand from you, if in May, there was a similar ruling. Now, another ruling is coming from the Supreme Court. How did Donald Trump go on about slapping tariffs on practically almost every other country on the earth? And not just that, he did try to sort of untwist these countries into accepting his unilateral deals.
The first verdict in May was given by a Court of International Trade, which is a lower level court. And the US lost it, but that Court of International Trade had also allowed the US administration to retain these tariffs in place till the Federal Court of Appeals, in the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, took a view on it. So once the appeal was filed before the Circuit Court, the court allowed it to retain the tariffs in place till the appeal was disposed of by it, which was done yesterday. So, President Trump had the right to, carry on with his tariffs. But, if since the matter was sub judice and pending before an appeals court, one view, conservative view, could be that President Trump should not have gone ahead beyond May to impose additional tariffs on other countries. But that is something which falls in the gray area. And President Trump decided to go ahead and impose fresh tariffs in the hope that the Federal Court of Appeals would rule in his favor.
Ambassador, but that's not what has happened. The Federal Appeals Court has, in fact, ruled something completely different, and he's called this illegal. And the fact that the imposition of national currency is not prescribed under any law in the United States Constitution. But I want to understand from you, what do you expect will happen from here on? If the Supreme Court also upholds this decision by the Appeals Court, then will we see a reversal of tariffs? And if that is to happen, then how soon?
There are two other acts under which President Trump can impose tariffs. One of them is the 1974 Trade Act. And this has been used extensively by the US in the past in terms of 301 and Super 301, etc. But that allows only a tariff of about 15% to be applied against countries against which the US is running a large trade deficit. And the period for which it can be imposed is only 150 days. So President Trump is unlikely to use that provision in the Trade Act of 1974. The third provision which he can invoke, and which he has indeed done for steel, aluminum, and autos, is the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, under Section 232 of which, if he can show that, of course, that would be subject to, again, judicial interpretation, if there is a national emergency or a vital national interest has been affected or is likely to get affected, the US president has the authority to impose tariffs. And in the Court of International Trade also did not touch the tariffs which were imposed under Section 232 of the 1962 Act on steel, aluminum, etc. So he has that justification. But of course, on steel and aluminum, one of the things which he had, which the administration has quoted, was that it was necessary for the arms and ammunition armaments industry of the US to use steel, aluminum, etc. And that is something which you can't really use against agricultural products or against clothing or many other leather goods, etc. So a wide range of products on which he has imposed tariffs will possibly cannot get justified under Section 232, except if you can show a direct connection between the national interest and the defense industry, etc. So that is a long shot, but there is a chance that President Trump will, if he loses in the Supreme Court, he will invoke his powers under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962.
Well,
And
that
again,
remains
it will go through the same process, more or less, and ultimately get decided by the Supreme Court. So he will get breathing time of at least a few months.
absolutely at least a few months until till October is what this appeals court has suggested. Meanwhile, Ambassador, like you rightly pointed out, that investigation into Section 232 has been going on, and perhaps once that gets completed, we'll get a clearer picture on the kind of tariffs that Trump is going to impose on semiconductors, on electronics, and of course on pharma. But one final question before we let you go: could this court decision embolden other countries to challenge the United States trade actions at the WTO, or at least in bilateral negotiations? Because there's some countries which have yielded to US's president's demands. Whether you take Japan, for instance, or European Union, but China and India are still putting up a very firm stance.
Well, in the context of bilateral trade negotiations, President Trump has been bullying the other countries. So there is no question of saying that you don't have the powers. He will say, I have the powers and I will impose additional tariffs on you. So I think that option is not available to the negotiating countries in a bilateral setting. Because he will say, I have the powers and I will win in the Supreme Court. And the other side can keep on protesting to no avail. As far as the WTO is concerned, India has also filed an appeal. But these dispute. Now, the dispute settlement system in the WTO is a two-tier system. First is the panel stage, in which three experts who are chosen from amongst a large body of experts will go into the matter and give a ruling in about 9 months' time. And once that ruling is available, the side which feels that it has not got justice can appeal. And only after that appeal is disposed of will the complaining party or the party which wins will have a locus standi or have the right to retaliate. Now, the point is that the appeal is heard by a 7-member body called the appellate body, of whom at least 3 members have to sit in on a bench to hear an appeal. Now, because President Trump did not allow in his first term any member to be selected for the appellate body, people keep retiring after 4 years, or if they get an extension after 8 years. And between 17 and 20, he ensured, or 19 rather, he ensured that the appellate body did not get fresh selections on incumbents. So by December 2019, there were no members of the appellate body left. So there is no appeal possible. So countries which gain a favorable verdict at the panel stage appeal in the void, as it is said. And the expectation is that if in future, at any point of time, if the appellate body gets its full complement of 7 members, then the appeal would be heard and then disposed of, and it could go in favor of the appellate country. But that is something which is, not available immediately. And whether it would at all be available in future at any point of time is open to debate.
Absolutely,
So
Ambassador.
the WTO, the short point is the WTO does not offer any scope for redressal of a grievance of a country at this stage.
Absolutely, and that calls for a reform of these multilateral institutions as well, Ambassador. But coming back to the point, well, Trump is certainly on shaky grounds. He's trying to impose tariffs going forward. While the existing trade deals may not automatically unravel, but the administration could definitely lose a pillar of its negotiating strategy, which could embolden other governments across the world, other foreign countries, to put a strong stance and to resist unjust demands by the Trump administration. Along that note, thank you very much for taking the time out once again and joining us here to discuss and share your views on this big story. And Anjali, it's back to the studio.
Thanks, Sumita, and thanks, Mr. Dasgupta, for helping us break down what the ramifications of this court ruling will be and what's the way ahead. Perhaps we'll have to wait for the Supreme Court's ruling on this to understand what happens next.